Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another Proko live stream. Today, we're joined by a brush making extraordinaire, a fantastic artist, and a very nice person with Lane Brown. How you
Oh,
doing, Lane?
hey, thanks for having me, Steven.
Yeah, it's great to see you again. A spoiler for anyone who doesn't know, behind the scenes, we do get to talk a little bit before the stream. So, Lane has been filled in on my rushed morning. I have been filled in on what his demo will be this morning. He's going to take us through some of his brushes that he's got in his Photoshop Master Pack that I'm sure many of you who follow Proko have already probably purchased or been told about before. So I think today we're doing 3 demos, you said?
Yeah, so I have a lot planned. 3 demos if I can fit them all in. And while I'm doing that, I want to talk about my brush packs and my reference packs. So
Okay.
it's gonna be fun.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I guess I'm gonna give you the stage. Let's go over see some stuff big.
All right. So first, just a quick overview. I've been making lots of brushes over the past few years. Really, it was started off as just a personal endeavor to try to make my own set of brushes that I want to use myself. I'm an illustrator, I do fine art, and kind of everything in between. And so, I set off to see like how realistic can I make brushes, both for Photoshop and Procreate. And it turns out with the recent tools that are available, surprisingly realistic. So, first off, and what I'm going to be using today is the Photoshop Master Pack, which includes my painting brushes, my drawing brushes, and my dirty ink brushes. And so I'm actually going to do 3 little demos, each focusing on one of these. And while doing that, I'm going to be referencing skull photos from my newly released Skulls and Bones reference pack.
It's a good pack, guys.
Yeah, so I teach painting and drawing, and one of the struggles students have is often not so much the fundamental skills, but actually finding good reference. Now, obviously, there's a ton of good reference online, but you have to sift through a lot of crap to find it.
This
So
is true.
I thought, well, maybe I'll just make my own, and so I set out first with the primitive forms pack, actually, especially for focusing on fundamentals. This pack is just filled, and I'll show you some examples, with hundreds of photos of basic fundamental forms, and I just went through hundreds of different arrangements of these basic forms under really strong lighting. Lighting is the big focus for me. I feel like I'm very picky about lighting. And oftentimes, if you're just looking for photo reference online, the lighting quality is going to be where it fails.
Agreed. A lot of times.
Oftentimes,
Oh,
yeah, oftentimes I just have like too many lights going on, and that creates all sorts of complex, sort of overlapping and clashing shadow shapes. So for my students and for myself, I really want nice, clear, simple lighting. And that's the focus of both of these reference packs.
I think a lot of people, when they go to look up free resources, from like Pexels or Unsplash or something, they have to comb through all these images that are kind of intended for like beauty photography or something for like advertising. And it's like, oh, this is a very nice
Yeah,
picture, not good for studies.
right, exactly. Yeah, for study, you really want simple natural lighting. Natural lighting is the ideal to me. Just the sun is one dominant key light source, and nothing else really competes with it. But obviously, you can replicate that in studio with a nice strong spotlight as well. And then you get fun, natural bounce light, like such in this image here. The green paper foundation is reflecting a really fun light up into the shadows, but it's not overwhelming the key light source. So yeah, all sorts of different arrangements. Some of these were taken in the studio, some of them were taken outside with sunlight, such as this one, which I think is really fun. All right. And the Skulls and Bones pack, which I recently released. likewise has hundreds of photos in different arrangements. I think I have over 1,900 images.
Jeez.
So it's a lot. And these photo packs are really sort of just a project of passion, I guess, because I spend months on them, on and off, kind of taking these shots. But yeah, all sorts of different skulls here. Lots of animal skulls. One of my favorites is like the snapping turtle skull. I feel like it looks like a dragon to me. It's
Yeah.
so awesome.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. I have like a crow skull, cat, some sort of bird with a crest. Really cool looking. Yeah, and I have like a miniature human skull as well. It's not a real human skull, just a small, but it's like a really convincing replica, very detailed.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, again, I had fun just arranging these in all sorts of different lighting arrangements and color backdrops and dramatic shadow. All right, so
For anyone who is probably now, they followed the link that I put into the chat here. They're over there looking at your brushes or any of these reference packs or anything. They're looking at them and they're like, oh man, they're just a little bit too expensive for me. No, they're not. You can save 20% right now during the Proko summer sale all month long, whether that's this week, next week, or the week after, on anything that you see on there. So don't worry, we got you.
yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and jump into my first little demo here. And with these, I'm going to focus on my painting brushes. Although I guess before I do that, I should kind of do a quick run through of my brush pack and how I have it set up here in Photoshop. So there's hundreds of brushes in this pack, which is a lot. And any other software, this would probably be way too much to work with. But the beautiful thing about Photoshop is that its brush system has these beautiful collapsible folders. So just like a file system, you can open a folder, you can have subfolders. And so even though I have hundreds of brushes in here, I'm able to just have the brushes that I'm currently using open, and I can completely close all the others. Mm-hmm. So there's no clutter. That's the beauty, in my opinion. You don't have to sift through brushes you're not using to find ones you want. And so I was very careful to organize this brush set with these folders. And so basically at the top of the list are what I call the essential tools. These are like the most basic, most fundamental brushes that you're going to just need all the time, like the simple round brush, the soft airbrush, and just like very basic things. Sometimes you need a brush that is just really sharp and bold. Mm-hmm. Yeah, give you nice strong edges. So that's the shape carver. Sometimes you want a brush that can give you really expressive, sort of textured line. This one's called the filigree detailer. I try to give these fun and somewhat descriptive names, mm-hmm, so I can recognize them.
Yeah.
Scumble, if you just need like a quick generic texture, just kind of all-purpose texture, this brush can give you that. Yeah. Particle spray, always fun to play with that. Have a soft stroke, just like sometimes you need really hard, crisp edges, sometimes you need really soft, subtle edges. Then I have a brush here.
I don't envy you this challenge, Lane, because as we were talking about this during the stream, I was considering just how many kinds of brushes you have to actually try to demonstrate and describe for people in here, while having just this mountain of like individually useful brushes.
Yeah. Well, I won't go through all of them. I think part of the fun is letting the user kind of play around and experiment.
Yeah. There was one question that did come up in here. It's just about compatibility across software. So one person asked, do they work in CS5, a previous version of Photoshop from many years ago?
I believe they should work in CS5.
Okay.
It's been a while since I've used it, though.
And then just to get ahead of anyone else asking any other questions about it, other software. So could people possibly load these into something like Procreate, Krita, or anything else?
So yeah, that's a question I get pretty often. Technically, yes, you can import them into a lot of other software, anything that accepts Photoshop files. However, most of these other platforms do not have the brush organization system that Photoshop has. So
Mhm.
when you import these brushes, it will, they'll just kind of be a chaotic mess.
Mhm.
Um, I have, when you download this brush pack, I do have a separate file designed for other software where you can install each of these folders individually. So that
Okay.
can help. However, still, um, the brush systems are a little different. So your mileage may vary as to how these brushes will function.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a good way to answer this one, and I appreciate that you have that where the individual folders can be loaded in. So someone's not looking to do painting just currently, they just want the inkers right now.
Yeah. All right, let me just start with this demo and I'll talk through more of the brushes as I go.
Yeah.
I'm going to start, and I put sort of the big concepts at the top of each of these. And what I'm going to practice here is working from big to small and general to specific. So this is sort of a very tried and true, sort of fail-proof way to paint from observation. So, I want to make the most general statement about my subject first. So what do I observe about this one? Well, the most general observation is that the light is coming down from the right side and casting shadow on the left. So I want to kind of go ahead and establish a general sort of lighting direction for this. And I'm going to begin by kind of placing down a general tone. So a lighter value on this side and a darker value on this side. So that sort of very general observation sets me up to begin this painting. Let's see. And so once I have that, like what's the next most general observation I can make? Well, we have sort of a big dark shadow shape coming down right here. And we have a nice sort of radiant green, blue color kind of right here. So just two simple shapes of color. The next most general observation I can make, I suppose, is the skull itself. So let me go ahead and lay that in.
We have the typical kind of software fighting happening in the chat now.
Oh, no.
CSP over Photoshop, everything. It's fine. You use what's
Yeah.
handy for you guys.
Well, I just recently saw that it's Photoshop's like 35th birthday.
Oh goodness.
And I'm 35 years old. So I started using it in high school actually.
Mhm.
So I've been using it for like 15 to 20 years now, something like that.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm in the exact same boat as you. I also started using this in high school, and I'm 35.
Nice.
Yeah,
So,
I remember using it, and it was like CS2 on some ancient computer. In like it was where they normally do the like yearbook layout kind of stuff, and I was like, I'm gonna draw.
yeah. I think that's where I started too. Yeah, so I have a long relationship with Photoshop, so I'm a bit attached to it for that reason alone. But also, I'll just say I have toured around with the other apps, and even though a lot of them have very great features, I will say Photoshop still has a lot of features that the others don't that I rely on. Specifically like the brush organization for one, but also tools like the mixer brush, which I'll be using later. It's really fantastic for getting some natural sort of goopy sort of oil paint effects. And while all these other apps have some unique perks of their own, I haven't found any that really wants to pull me away from Photoshop.
Yeah, I definitely get that one. I think that they're supposed to announce some new brush engine stuff. It seems like Kyle Webster is over there playing around a whole bunch and helping them develop some new things. So maybe whenever that happens. But for now, even though you can load these brushes into other software, they'll just get demoed in Photoshop.
Yeah. I do enjoy Procreate. I will say that. When I'm not at my desk and I want to be a bit more mobile, I really enjoy Procreate. I think it's a nice between kind of just drawing in a sketchbook and working in Photoshop.
Agreed.
All right, so my strategy here, now as I begin to focus more specifically on the skull, I really want to keep the skull as simple of a form as I can. So, the fun thing about skulls is that they're this interesting combination of really intricate detail, but also a really big, simple form when you really look at it. And so what I want to do is first and foremost focus on establishing in my painting the sense of the big overall volume and capture that sense of form underneath this specific lighting. So that's what I'm doing here. So I'm just going to ignore for now all the little details, all the little cutouts and crevices that I see, and kind of just pretend that this is like a really big, simple form.
For anyone who doesn't know, Lane does make brushes, but Lane also makes tutorials. If some of you, I think there was one person earlier who did actually mention your Patreon where you share tutorials. They mentioned that in the chat. If you guys go over here to this link that I'll put into the description, you guys can follow Lane as you're kind of like going through the process of learning. Was it figure drawing that you're doing over there right now?
Yeah, so let me bring up these images here. I just launched a few weeks ago my Patreon, and right now I'm focusing on a personal project which is all about figure drawing. It's going to be a long series, I think, of figure drawing, probably hundreds of drawings that I'm ambitiously saying and planning to turn into an art book. So it's a really fun little adventure I've started, and I'm sharing all my progress from rough and dirty rough sketches to finished art, and along the way I'm also going to be constantly making all sorts of instructional videos as well, covering the fundamentals of figure drawing, but I'm really trying to focus on specific things that I'm interested in. For instance, like I won't be teaching much anatomy. There's a lot of artists out there who teach anatomy way more better than I do, but I'm going to focus more on other things like composition, posing figures, edge control, and all that sorts of fun stuff.
Yeah. So if while Lane is teaching here while demoing brushes, you think I would love to learn some more from Lane. I love this teaching style. Just follow the link in the description.
Yeah. So right now, like I said, it's focused on figure drawing. So if that interests you, check me out. I will probably expand in the future into painting as well. But right now, the focus, I'm trying to keep it fairly narrow.
Mm-hmm.
So I recommend that you take your time at this stage. It's very tempting to jump ahead and start getting into details. I'm always eager to do that. So I have to restrain myself and just say, I'm going to spend a few minutes refining this stage of the painting and try to make it feel as representative, as if that's the word, of the subject as possible. So even though it doesn't have detail, try to make it look and feel like your subject as much as you can. And surprisingly, if you are fairly accurate with your values and your colors and the sense of lighting, it will begin to feel like the subject. Especially if you zoom out, and that's another thing to do constantly is zoom out. Try to get a distant perspective of your subject so you can judge everything as a whole. I also like to squint my eyes a bit as well. Helps to blur out the little details.
Hmm. Yeah, it's kind of the reverse of the problem that people have if they're sitting there, just like fiddling away drawing on their iPad, where they'll zoom in forever and they're spending all this time drawing the tiniest details that
Hmm.
nobody sees.
Yeah, it's so easy to do that, and I find myself doing that all the time. You know, I'll have my nose against the screen if I'm not careful. Um, but it doesn't matter how nice the little details look if they don't relate correctly to the whole.
Hmm. Yeah, because then you'll find yourself you're like how like the longest amount of time into the piece that you're making, and you find that you have to change proportions on something, and that's the worst. You don't want to
Hmm.
do this to yourself. For anyone who may have any other questions about the actual educational side of what's being demonstrated right now, or questions about brushes or anything else, you can just ask Lane like, what's the material in your background there with you in your room? Feel free to drop questions in the chat and we'll answer them.
Yeah, the backdrop is actually a fun rug. Well, you call it a rug or a carpet. I'm not sure. Sort of a organic material that I found.
Yeah, just some texture back there.
Yeah.
See, that was my question, guys. I got it in. You could too. Some people here in the chat haven't made it to a live stream before. Thanks for being here, guys.
So I'm about ready to start laying in these smaller shapes. But again, I want to make sure that I take my time here, because the stronger this simple, very general statement is, the simpler everything else is going to be going forward, and the faster it's going to come together. Because if you think about it, like just in terms of percentages, like I've already established like 80% of the content of the subject minus the detail.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now let me begin laying in some of these shapes, kind of cutting out. And it really does feel like carving. I like to relate it to sculpting and carving at this stage, because we have this big, simple mass, and now you're going to start chiseling chunks out of it.
I did drop a poll in the chat asking if you guys remember to work big to small when you make art, or if you guys just jump on in, you start making like the detailed filigreed necklace or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm very curious. Robert Alleman in the chat asked, do you keep in mind construction or do you work with silhouette more?
A bit of both, and constantly kind of going back and forth between a focus on the 2D shapes and the 3D structure. It's all 2D shapes fundamentally, but we're always trying to create the illusion of 3D.
Okay. I would agree. Yeah, I think they kind of feed into each other. Atharva? I'm not sure. How do you select the right value for rendering?
Good question. I think as you practice, you just sort of naturally get a bit more accurate at reaching for the right value. But I will say, like, I'm never perfectly accurate, and I don't expect to be. That's sort of the change in mindset that I had, as I used to think, oh, well, I have to pick the perfect, most accurate color to place down. But I've sort of shifted my mindset to, I just need to be approximate. And that frees me up a lot. Suddenly I don't feel as much pressure. So I need to be approximately accurate. And then I'll place it down and see how it looks. And then I'll shift it from there. So I'll go a little bit lighter if I need to, a little bit darker. If it's color, same thing. Place it down, see how it looks, and then make adjustments as needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's one big difference from how a lot of people tend to think of working in something in more of an illustrative way, where you're probably just going to lay down, like your marker, your pencil, your pen, or whatever, and that's probably it in that time. You know, you do things in layers that are pretty set and you never revisit something. But if you're working in a more painterly style, you just kind of work on the thing as you go. Like you said, kind of sculpting it out of what is there.
Yeah. And of course, digital is very forgiving as far as color picking goes. I recommend practicing using traditional media, traditional paint to mix colors and values to get experience. I think, even though it's so much easier with digital to just pick whatever color you need right away, but when you're actually mixing pigments together, it forces you to think through it a bit more and really understand how the different colors relate to each other. And if all you've ever done is work digital, you just won't have that intimate experience. So slowly blocking in these shapes and these cutouts, and actually this is a really simple process at this point. Since I already laid in the underlying values and color, I'm really just, like I said, carving out. And this is why I enjoy this process so much, because I'm not forced to come in and paint, in between the details anymore. It's already established.
Yeah, absolutely. There was one question here. So Jay Hill, who also did a very nice thing and actually tagged us in the chat when they asked the question. Thank you for that. Do you recommend limiting how many brushes you use in a digital artwork? I see other artists use lots to add variety, but as a beginner, I find that to be very hard to stay balanced.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any strict limit, but I typically use maybe 3 to 5 brushes for any given piece, unless it's something really in depth with lots of specific effects. But I don't try to use too many brushes for each painting, because I think it can actually begin to get a bit chaotic if you have too many different effects happening. But likewise, if you use just one brush, it can begin to feel a little monotonous as well if you have just all the same effects happening very evenly. So I do like to have a bit of variety.
I think having too many would definitely, it can be to your detriment. Like imagine a sculpture that just had all these different textures all over it, wood grain here, some cloth texture here, like all in one kind of form. It would end up being just a little too busy, you know?
Yeah.
But having those tools at hand when you need them, that part's important.
Yeah, so one aspect I was very conscious of when making these brushes is, well, my ideal brush is one brush that can achieve a broad range of effects. So, I'm thinking okay, can I get both, really soft transitions, and can I simply press harder to get really bold stroke? Can maybe I tap the brush to generate some interesting shapes and texture like this?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very thoughtful about that. I would say a lot of brush packs, you'll see the brush has a really nice texture, but maybe it doesn't actually feel very good to paint with.
Mm-hmm.
It's just one flat texture.
Doesn't jitter or anything.
Yeah, so I really focus on this one here. I can make it really big to get really huge chunks. I can make it small to get some fine texture, and kind of everything in between. So that's one goal I've had, is to make the brushes very versatile.
Yeah, let's see. I think we did have another couple questions. Are you okay to take questions, or did you want to mention what you were doing?
No, fire away.
Okay. All right. So Glimpse9 asked, is texture necessary for understanding the volume of objects?
Interesting question. I would say like my immediate thought is no,
Hmm.
because texture is generally more of a surface detail.
Yeah, I think it would depend on the thing,
Yeah.
like and the scale of the thing. Like I think that's the main time you want to consider it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So if so, like so, let's say whenever you see something in a movie, like or here a totally different thing. In like Power Rangers, you'll see the things that are supposed to be giant, you know, and there's no like if they were to zoom in on like the foot or something that you see normally in there, there's no like really small looking scratches that would happen just naturally. You know, you feel the scale in this kind of way. If something is huge, it can have very, very, very small weathering, or like a certain kind of pattern of like a patina on it or something like that. That just kind of implies the scale naturally. That would look wrong if you just scaled it up.
Hmm.
In that way, texture can matter. But if you're doing something, you don't necessarily like the chances of you having to worry about that in the pieces that people typically make aren't that large. But that's the time when I think you would consider it.
Yeah.
And then, oh, Skyder in the chat did ask, where do you find reference? I've got great news for you, Skyder. These skull references came from Lane's skull reference pack. How many skull references are in there that you shot?
Yeah, I don't find reference. I make my own. uh, no, it's there's like what did I say? There's like over 1,900 images in the skull reference pack, I believe.
Goodness.
So, and yeah, that I've worked on it over the course of several months. You know, in any free time, I have a table set up with a camera next to it, and I would just whenever I'm feeling like it, I would just snap a few shots, make some arrangements, and so it took a while, but
Mhm.
you know, I really wanted to put thought to each one.
Yeah. So that's where you can find some reference. You can find it there. Lane, on the other hand, found it and coalesced it into one pack. Just to report it on the poll from earlier in the chat, we had 72% of people saying yes, they do remember to work large to small, and 28% of people saying that they do not.
All right.
Look at that. But look at the benefits here, guys. Look at working big to small. Lane got to just lay the thing in, and now you can go to the fun part, the icing on the cake that is the detailing. You know, you get there so
Yeah.
much sooner.
Yeah, so like at this stage it's like it's really starting to come together, and it's really just a matter of like, okay, how much more time do I want to spend on this as to how much tighter it gets.
Yeah.
But at each stage I kind of want to, like I was saying, like, you know, pause and before I add more complexity, assess what I have and say, okay, let me see if I can just spend a few minutes refining this before I add more variables into the mix. And that's always good to just to pause and do that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like the old adage, you know, measure twice, cut once.
Hmm.
There were some other questions here. I think Robert Alleman asking another useful question. They asked, can you explain how you use layers? I can see you building them up, but for what reason?
Yeah, so layers is actually something that I tend to just make a lot of, way more than I actually need, really. But I have a hotkey right under my hand that makes a new layer whenever I want it. So whenever I'm just somewhat unsure of something I'm about to do, I
Mm.
make a new layer. That way I can flip it on and off and see if I like it. Because I also have a hotkey for flipping the layer on and off. So I can toggle whatever I just did. And, you know, if it doesn't improve the painting, then I remove it, basically.
Mhm. Do you have a set amount of time or a set amount of layers that you see kind of stacking up where you start considering whether you should merge down or not?
Nothing specific, but like I could do it now. I mean, basically once I progressed into the image, I don't need any of the layers before. So, whenever I start to get into the hundreds and the computer starts chugging and begging me, I'll merge the image and flatten it.
Like you merged for mercy, not for like
Yeah.
any other reason. For some people, in case anyone in the chat thinks like, oh, it's not how I work because of my workflow. That might be true. Yeah, for some people, like a couple of artists that we work with who work for companies like they work for Riot or is some larger company that's doing splash art or something. Oftentimes there'll be really small notes that they have to apply to a piece from their art director, or they're going to actually modify the piece that they made to feature a different skin that's for sale or something like that. And so they'll actually still keep those 100 layers, and their computers will just keep begging for mercy because they still need to have those.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of the relationship between you and your computer, you know?
Yeah, I know some of my favorite artists like Craig Mullins and like Jamie Jones, they tend to try to flatten their images as much as they can, but yeah, like you said, some jobs simply require having a lot of layers. A lot of times these days, the game studios especially, they want to animate the still images, so you have to have elements on separate layers for that, and that can be tricky.
Yeah. As a person who does some of that animation stuff, like getting a layered document versus having to cut it up and then like paint in areas that you're going to expose, it's the worst.
Yeah.
It sucks.
Yeah, I've done that a few times, and it's like the painting process goes so much faster when I'm free to not worry about putting things on different layers. But at the same time, it takes so much time to recover the layers if you don't establish it and maintain it. So.
Yeah, it can be a bear. Let's see. Going through the questions here, there are a couple questions. I don't know which ones necessarily apply to this demo versus possibly one of the later ones that you were going to do, because you do have 3 that you're doing today, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'll save a couple of these for later. So you guys in the chat, don't think that I'm not asking your questions. It's just I can see the future, and I know that it'll be useful for you then.
Yeah. And I think I'll go ahead and wrap this first one up.
Okay. Is there anything that you want to say about it?
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely, like I said, I could spend more time on this and get into all the fun details. That's one reason I enjoy the skulls, is like you can just keep zooming in and seeing all this intricate, texture happening, and really, really fun to paint that. But I really focus more on like a big impression here, almost pretending that if I'm working traditionally, like I have a small like 4-inch canvas. And I have a big brush, so I really just physically can't get more detail. That's kind of the aesthetic I'm aiming for. So I'm about there, I think, with this one.
I like this idea. Definitely knowing what kind of study you're going to be doing going into it, it really helps. So you don't just like decide to make it your magnum opus, your greatest piece of art ever.
Mm-hmm. And that's one reason I often like to have multiple studies on a page, because I just psychologically, if I have just one image on my screen, I feel like I have to make it my best. I have to put all my effort into it. Whereas if I have another right next to it, I'm like, okay, I can jump to this other one now and play around with it. Instead of trying to pack everything into one image, I can spread it out a bit.
Yeah.
And so let me jump to the next one.
All right, guys. So we're gonna do a thing that I didn't do with the previous one. You see, can you zoom in on the skull that you're gonna use for this reference here?
Yes.
All right, guys. I want to know, what is this skull's name? What would you name this skull? Please drop them into the chat. The best one, the best few I will recognize in here. If you guys just say, like Bodie McBoatface, I'm not gonna respond to this. You guys got to give me good skull names, all right? Thank you, Leighton. All right, and
Yeah.
what brushes are you using to start this one? Are these similar to the ones that you were using in the last one? And do you have a different goal than the previous one?
Yeah, so I'm just kind of playing around. And one reason I have so many brushes is because I just like to play with different brushes in each image. A lot of them have similar effects. I made sure that none of them are too similar. That's important. Um, but, some have a different texture than the other. And so I just I enjoy the variety. That keeps things interesting to me. So let's say I'm going to block in with my tramp brush here. Um, Same thought process though, working from big to small. This brush has like a fun sort of noodly texture to it.
I do like what's going on in that one. A texture there, some free weathering, just built into the brush. All right, so we've got some names here. I'm gonna go through them. Elaine, help me decide which one is the good one here.
Okay.
All right, so we've got. I think some person. I don't think they were saying a name. I think they were just excited. They said "snapping turtle skull" in all caps. Armando, Filbert, Cubert, Jimmy, Frank, Eduardo, Scoop, Frank the Finnick, Jimmy, Mousy, Bartholomew. I think I think that's enough. Did any of those do it for you?
I don't know, honestly. Those all sound like cute furry creatures to me, more so than a.
I would agree. I think if we're your art directors right now and this is what you're turning in at the end of the day, guys, we have notes. Out of all of these, I liked Scoop the most because I see it
Yeah,
for
I
the
can see
head a
Scoop.
little bit. Yeah, but yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Oh, someone threw in Xerxes.
That's better. That's got some edge to it.
Yeah, we'll see what comes up as you work here. So looking at this one and with what your goals are for this one, how are you approaching this one differently?
Same thought process. I am like playing a bit more with the texture right now. And this is something I often like to do is just kind of spend some time just kind of piling up the texture as a base. Um, you know, Kind of creating a ground that has a lot of variety of hue shifting and value variation instead of just a flat color.
Hmm.
But yeah, I'm thinking from big to small and general to specific. I'm not following, as you can see, I'm not following the image exactly, and I never want to feel like I'm a slave to the reference. I always want to feel okay. I can play around here. Um, so you can see the gradient is doing something a little different in the photo. I'm saying, well, maybe I can make it a little bit more active by giving it more of a diagonal sweep.
Yeah, I like that you're using the two different values of it with a slightly different hue, and it kind of just adds up to the final thing, like the final value of what the actual
Yeah, it's
original
like
is.
it's called like optical blending effect happening. So instead of mixing the color um, so that it's just one flat tone, you have a lot of intermingling color here that blends optically,
Hmm.
and that's often fun. It adds a bit of energy to the mix. But yeah, same general process here. I'm going to try to block in the big simple form that I see. And that's the fun thing about these skulls like this is that they do have really big, very obvious forms if you look at them the right way.
That is one thing that I think is really nice about this reference pack that you're using, that you made, obviously. Because so many people, like you go to art school, you're doing tutorials and everything, and you're doing skull studies or other studies, but there's only so many times you can render the human skull and have it still be fun.
Hmm.
At least for me. Someone else out there, it's their favorite freaking thing. They just love it, Lane. They'll draw even the same skull 10 million times. But I like some variety in the references.
Yeah, I started a few years ago just kind of collecting these skulls.
Oh, these are actually within your collection. It's not like you
Hmm.
found them somewhere at like a museum and you have something that you shoot them on in some way.
No, these are all skulls that I've collected over the years.
Okay.
They make really nice studio decoration as well.
Okay, I like this. Yeah, because
Yeah.
well, why is that not the texture in your background then? Just a wall of skulls behind you.
Yeah, I should do that. I should just have shells of skulls.
We have some other names. People are getting more ambitious. They picked up on what you're putting down, unlike in Xerxes, and so we've got a lot of X's and things in here, a lot of Z's.
Oh, good.
So we've got this is I think this is Drixar the Desolator,
Nice.
Spawn of Trogdor, right? Fangalore, Clamp, Baxter the Gargoyle, okay,
Mm.
Karzak, and there was other one here. Someone tried to throw me off in this one. They said let's go with SZCZEPAN, and I'm gonna go ahead and say this is Shazepin
Wow.
or Sejapan. I said greetings from Poland. Yeah, you guys have a different relationship with Z's over there.
Yeah, I'm definitely liking the vibe of those a bit better.
Yeah, I'll choose a winner at the end of this. I like how you're communicating the actual like curvature of the form on this one.
Yeah, I'm actually like I'm because my brain isn't fully focused. I tend to wonder a little bit, and so I'm kind of actually getting a little too much of the shape happening.
Mm.
But down here towards the bottom, I am really trying to focus on just the simplicity of this form. I have to just constantly remind myself. It's always a process of reminding myself to stay simple while painting,
Hmm.
even when I'm not demonstrating. I just have to. I need a flashing sign in front of me. Keep it simple.
Yeah, focus.
Zoom out.
Yeah, it's hard, especially like you said, even while not doing a demo, but especially while doing a demo with a person talking about like dragon names next to you, it does present challenges. Yeah, I like that you're definitely demoing it where you're viewing it at scale for the benefit of your rendering on it. And I appreciate that. I think like as we mentioned earlier, a lot of people can kind of get past that because they want to get down to that like the icing already
Yeah.
rather than really like building the thing up.
Yeah, I'm zoomed out quite a bit. I know that can make it a little hard to see what I'm doing sometimes, but it's so crucial
Hmm.
to not zoom in too much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you're watching this on an iPad, a computer, anything like that, you're probably viewing it at about the scale that Lane is right now. If you're watching it on your phone, I'm sorry, I can't do anything for you. I do want to remind people that the reason that we're here today, besides just to get taught about things by Lane with materials made by Lane, is for us to talk about the Proko summer sales going right now. Right now, you guys can save 20% on pretty much everything on Proko. That's brush packs, reference packs like the ones being used here. That could be on courses or anything like that. Anything that you're looking for that's on Proko, you can save 20% on it for this entire month until I think it's July 6th. So come on over, save some money, and build up your art skills.
So now I'm dropping in those eye sockets. And these are naturally probably the focal point of the subject.
Mhm.
We're naturally drawn to eyes or the cavities in which eyes would be. So I will probably, try to spend a little extra time here to refine these shapes. I find that if you can spend some time refining your focal point, you can be much looser elsewhere outside of that. And that actually makes the image more interesting and more dynamic. Rather than trying to evenly render across the whole painting, having a focus really makes the image more exciting. It helps to drive the viewer to that focal point. Whereas if you're kind of evenly rendering across everything, it will sort of flatten things out. And there won't be a sense of direction to it.
It's a very good point. There was a piece, a fan art piece that an artist that I like recently had posted, and I found myself, even though I know the character that the person was doing the fan art of, and I like that character a whole lot, I was drawn to one particular element of the piece that they had unintentionally kind of given the most space, but then also had the most detail within, rather than looking to the face of the character, which you ideally want to prioritize. At least in the composition that they had, you do that. Otherwise, you put the most detail, like you said, where you want to, where the interaction point is that you want them to look at. I think there was one other question here that I think is a really good one to bring up. The Lizard Wizard themselves asked, why do a lot of people paint with gray backgrounds? Is there an actual reason behind it, or is it just less bright for the eyes?
Yeah, so it's definitely easier on the eyes than having, especially when working digital, a blank white screen is like having a lamp in your face. So it's definitely easier on my eyes to have a gray, but it's also just sort of a good neutral backdrop to help me judge the values that I'm using better.
Mm-hmm.
And this is true, traditional painters will do this as well. They'll tone their canvas to start. Their palette might have like a gray tone to it, all to help them better gauge the colors they're working with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even if anyone here has watched any of Stan's painting tutorials in the past that are on the channel, you'll even see under his palette, which is it's just a sheet of glass, but underneath that, there's actually just a middle value gray piece of paper, so that the paint that's on top of there gets to read as more accurate to its values. It's not being, or values in hue, rather than it looking like something different because it's being seen in comparison to the thing below it. It's pretty important. There was another question here from Fino in the chat. They were asking, is there any chance you will do tutorials about fundamentals or portraits in the future?
Yeah.
Do you think that this is something that you'll tackle?
Yeah, I think there's a good chance of that. If you look back in the past few live streams that I've done with Proko, I've actually done some of that. I did some portraits and some figures. But I definitely intend to do more as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember the portrait one that you had done. That was a couple years ago. I don't think we didn't do this one together. But yeah, it was a really good one. And he wasn't distracted by anyone talking about lizards, which was great. But if for some reason you go back and you watch those live streams that had Lane doing that, or it's not the time when Lane's tackling that on his Patreon or anything, there are a bunch of portraiture lessons on Proko, both here on YouTube or a whole portraiture course over on Proko.com.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Robin. Oh, there's an umlaut in here. Robin Blucher asked, question about texture. Do you ever smudge or have soft blends when using texture brushes? Or do you only focus on creating edges with texture?
I do smudge a lot. I have a hotkey for my smudge tool, and I'm constantly switching back and forth between brush and smudge tool. And the smudge is just a very effective way to soften or blend an edge very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also one of my custom brushes. If you just grab the default smudge tool in Photoshop, it's more of a smear. It kind of drags the pixels, and it's not often very useful. But I can show you here. Like if you look at my smudge tools folder, there's a lot of smudge tools, and they each have different effects. Some for very soft blending, some for some, like, let's say, like the wicked smudge can give you
Wicked.
wicked effects. Um, so I've had a lot of fun making these.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, the brushes at the top of each folder are the ones that I grab the most. So just the most used tools are prioritized at the top. Just part of the organization there.
And for anyone who did miss it, that when you mentioned it earlier, you did say that you have, since you can load these into other software, but they don't necessarily have the same organizational tools that Photoshop does. You do have some different breakout folders that allow people to just take kind of one set at a time.
Mm-hmm.
So for anyone out there who's just imagining the horror of loading a whole pack into Procreate sometimes, Lane's got you.
Yeah. All right, so I've kind of noodled on this a bit. To wrap it up, let's say I want to quickly add this really rough texture to the surface. That's one thing I find interesting about this skull in particular, is just the really abrasive texture it has. So I'm going to grab my Freya brush and see if I can just drop in sort of, an illusion of that character. And, when you're painting, it's not necessarily going to be the specific shapes that you see, but instead, like, say, I just want to capture an abrasive texture, and that's usually going to be accurate enough. And so that's what I'm doing here.
Yeah. No, I like the way that you approach this. It seemed like you had more of that shadow, the actual shadow curvature of the shape, and then you're going over it with the brighter color, like closer to white than that. So it looks like the areas that are raised above it.
And then I have all sorts of other effects, like the chunky scatter. If I use this off to the side, you can see just how effective that is at creating a really high contrast texture.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is in my folder I call the Quick Kit. And essentially, unless I need something specific from the other folders, this is the group of brushes that I use the most. And my aim with this set here is just to have like a full range of effects. So when I'm just really quickly trying to generate a composition, an idea, maybe a concept art piece, I know that all the tools I need are right here under my hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's really important for your tools to kind of serve you, rather than you having to go through some like huge resource library or something. The stuff that you use most should be quick to hand. There was one other question that I think I want to make sure and get in before we possibly switch to something different. So Monkey Juice in the chat was asking, when laying in values, is it better to lay all the values of the same group and then go to darker, lighter values? Or is it better to lay in all the values but work based in certain areas, I think. If you want me to repeat that one, I kind of had to modify it a little bit.
Good. I don't know. I mean, I think I take different approaches sometimes. Sometimes I think it's good to go ahead and establish a full range of value. Go ahead and establish your lightest light and your darkest dark. That way you can then place everything else in relationship to them. I think that's a more sort of direct way to work. If I'm really trying to get something fast, I do that. If I'm trying to build something up more slowly, more gradually, more delicately perhaps, then I would say I kind of start with the midtones and gradually introduce darker and lighter values as I go.
I think that's a good way to approach this one. I think by and large, especially if you're working in a way that does have you working from big to small, like depending on the purpose of the study, if you're doing something that has you practicing one specific thing a little more than others, you might approach it a little bit differently. But what you said for a general piece, I think is very good for sure.
Yeah, so just trying to add a few finishing touches. Again, this is meant to feel like a fast study with a big chunky brush on a small canvas, really. So I don't want to get too tight with it. But I'm trying to kind of zoom out here and just kind of judge the overall effect. And if it looks good at a small scale, then you can feel pretty confident, because then you know that to make it look good at a big scale, it's just a matter of spending a bit more time on it and refining details.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think I'm pretty good with this. So let me now jump to demo number 2.
Woo-hoo.
Lost and Found. And for this one, I'm going to jump down to my dry media brushes, into my charcoal brushes. Now, I'm a big fan of charcoal drawing, of charcoal pencil and chunky charcoal sticks. I love figure drawing, and whenever I'm figure drawing from life, I'm using real charcoal. And so that sort of inspired me first a few years ago to make my Procreate brush set, the Charcoal Master Pack. That's kind of where it all began for me with the brushes. So all these are really inspired by my experience with real tools, and my goal is to make it look and feel as realistic as I can. So I also have a pastel pack for Procreate as well, which is it focuses a bit more on texture than the charcoal pack. So
Yeah, I can vouch for both of these as a person who's used both of them and then tried to convince other people to get them. It's not a heavy lift once people see what's in there for them to see them and go, okay, no, yeah, I need to add this to my tool set.
yeah. All right, so this one, as I've said, I've labeled it Lost and Found. So that's kind of my focus, and in a way, this is going to be somewhat of an opposite approach to the painting, where instead of trying to capture everything, the big impression of everything, I'm actually going to try to capture like little small, specific details. But I am going to begin with sort of a simple sort of tonal effect. I'm using my willow charcoal brush here. And if you know like willow or vine charcoal, it's like this really soft charcoal, really powdery. Sometimes if you sneeze too hard, it will just blow off your paper. But it's really fun for just kind of like these painterly strokes and painterly effects. And oftentimes when I'm doing a drawing, I just kind of want to begin by putting something on the page, kind of dirty it up a bit to give myself something to work into. So that's what I'm doing here. And in the process, it also kind of gives you some fun sort of abstract energy happening. There's some gesture here. And so that's just more interesting right away than a flat tone. All right. And so now let's see. I could pick any brush. Let's try this one, the Sargent Charcoal. And I'm just going to kind of begin just kind of drawing into this.
Jen Whalen in the chat asked, if you've bought a brush pack in the past, can you have access to the demos now? I don't believe I saw those in the past. I think, do they?
You should have access. I'm trying to remember which ones have demos. In the Skulls pack, I included a video demo. But,
yeah, I think that there are things in there.
Yeah, there was some time-lapse recordings in the Procreate packs. You might be referring to that.
Okay. Yeah, if you guys So Jen, it sounds like you bought a brush pack. If there's something in particular that you're looking for that you can't find, reach out to support@proko.com and we can sort that one out with you, help you find that or address the
Yeah.
issue if there's something that isn't on there.
Yeah, if there's anything that was included in the files, you can just, you know, re-download. You should have access to it.
Yeah, absolutely. But speaking of things that are included with brush packs, you said that you're actually updating some brush packs here sometime this year, right?
Yeah, I'm in the process of adding more brushes to this pack, the Photoshop Master Pack. Probably going to be like dozens of new brushes and tweaks to current brushes. So I probably have that out within the month, I would say. I've been working on
Okay.
it for a while. It always takes a bit longer than I expect
Yeah.
because as soon as I start making brushes, I get ideas for more brushes, and then I have to test them out. Each of these brushes I put through a lot of trial and error to make sure it's as good as it can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you get feedback from very picky people like Stan who want
Yeah.
different characteristics to the Proko brush that's in there.
Right. Yeah. I'm updating the Proko pencil brush. So I think Stan's gonna like it now.
Yeah. We'll get him. We'll get him. There were a couple questions here. So someone was asking if you would consider this to just be a two-value study.
This one here, I wouldn't say is particularly limited in terms of value. Obviously, it kind of starts off very simple, but I'm thinking I'm actually going to, not really focus on a limit to value for this one. I'm actually going to add some light as well.
Kind of like working on tone paper.
Yeah, like as if I'm using a white pastel or something on top of this. And like I've labeled up here, lost and found is kind of my focus. And so even though you can see everything very clearly in the reference, in the drawing, I don't really want to capture everything. So there's going to be some things that I let get lost. In particular, what I like to do is zoom out, squint my eyes, and try to observe where are areas of highest contrast in your subject. So, naturally, I think it's kind of in this region of the subject that I'm seeing the highest contrast. And I think, this is kind of going to be my focal area. So I will bring out a few edges and details elsewhere, but by and large, I'm going to let things outside of that focal area fade away. All this is going to be really soft if there at all.
There was a question here that someone did ask. This was Lizard Wizard again, asking, there's a course on Proko called Digital Painting Fundamentals that covers composition, but the Marvel course, our comics course, also teaches composition. What's the difference between how they teach it? So for each different medium and the intended use of that medium, there will be inherent differences. So for something that's like a painting or a drawing, that's just going to be this standalone piece by itself that you will never see in the context of another image next to it that's supposed to tell a story. You'll have different kind of ways that you approach that piece. For something like a comic, where you need to kind of drag the eye of the viewer to see what's happening in that and then move them into the next panel, or otherwise make space for other elements in there like word bubbles or other things like that. There'll be a whole set of different considerations that you have to make. And that'll actually be different even within just a comic book itself. Sometimes you'll have a whole splash page. Sometimes it'll be just individual pieces, like panels on a page. So each of them have their own considerations, There's some general guidelines for composition that you can take across all of those, but there will be some specifics. So if you're trying to do comics, a lot of the composition knowledge that you'll already have, those things will apply. You just might modify them a little bit for something like comics. I hope that makes sense. Now, when you were first putting in the areas that you were kind of like softly getting in there with the vine brush in the beginning, I'll be honest, I wasn't fully sure what part of the image you were rendering at that point because I didn't know that you were treating it like tone paper at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But now seeing it come together, I like where you're choosing to kind of push something into the background and fuzz out an edge.
Yeah, and this is pretty much the way I like to work with traditional charcoal on paper. Versus, painting naturally gravitates more towards capturing the big atmosphere, the big impression from one side of the canvas to the other. Whereas drawing is naturally a more precision tool. And so I tend to focus in more directly on a specific aspect of my subject.
There's a comment in the chat from earlier from John Doe saying, "Oh my God, Lane is completely locked in. Like the world around him has faded away, and his painting is all that exists."
I try to.
It's that Zen space. Everything is creation.
Well, it's really nice when you can get into the flow state where everything around you just kind of disappears and you're totally entranced by what you're working on.
I think this time you'd be tonally entranced. But
Yeah.
We never did decide on a name for the previous skull. People did bring that up in the chat here. Were there any good enough candidates, or do you think that what they presented is such that this skull unfortunately goes unnamed?
Oh man, I like them, but I can't say I was a huge fan of any particular one.
Okay, yeah, I would agree. Nothing like blew my mind. There was the one.
Sorry, guys.
They threw the Z's and the S's in
Try
there.
harder.
I liked it for the exercise of it. But the good news is you guys can find Lane online at Lane Draws. You can go tell him over there the skull names that he should be using.
Yeah.
Or just see some of his completed art, I guess, if you want to be like a good supporter of a person on socials. But feel free to spam him with skull names also.
Yeah, you can do that.
Jermina in the chat asked, speaking of flow, how do you get back at drawing flow after looking away?
It's not easy. It's very difficult to get into the flow state sometimes. Some good music can help. But some days I have trouble.
Is there anything that's kind of like the tried and true that you put on for music?
I tend to listen more towards like movies, soundtracks, sort of atmospheric stuff. Kind of because I want the ambience. Sometimes if I'm doing illustration, I want a particular mood, then try to get a soundtrack that fits that mood. Yeah, I like orchestral stuff too. I'm stuck up in that way. So.
How painterly of you. No, Stan is similar in this regard. Chances are, if you go into Stan's office and he's got music playing, it's like the Gladiator score, or even the Tron Legacy score, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
If he really wants to mix it up every once in a while, it'll be some Billie Eilish, but by and large, it's movie scores.
Yeah. So this is actually getting pretty close to what I'm after at this point. Again, it's like lost and found. So I'm not trying to capture everything here. I'm really trying to decide, okay, I want a focal point kind of in the center of the skull here. So maybe I'll just kind of tighten that up a little bit more.
Yeah, I appreciate this one. I think this one really shows off the texture of the brush emulation that you've got going here. And it really feels like charcoal, which is not an easy one to get from brushes pretty often digitally.
Yeah, that's a tricky effect. I'd say the most challenging effect to capture is watercolor. Mainly because watercolor, just innately, what it makes it look the way it does is the physics of the water actually moving around on the paper. So that's really difficult to replicate. But let me just like quickly show while I'm talking about it.
You can do watercolors.
I'll just show some examples in my Painterly brushes, subfolder for watercolor. Just quickly kind of show some of these. So there's one watercolor brush.
Okay.
It actually has like a little bit of a flow to it. Like as you move it, you can kind of see it shifting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was pretty happy when I figured out, okay, finally it's something that starts to actually look wet with digital pixels.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I do like, as in the first bits that you were working through there, you kind of see it kind of pull up in the parts where you've overlapped, like it would when you linger in that kind of space with watercolor.
Yeah, so these are fun. They were very challenging, I'll say that. It took me a while to figure out just the right sliders to tweak to get that effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and people are mentioning in the chat there's some like Corel and Rebel. They have some stuff that's some pretty decent emulation in there.
Yeah, that's one thing that Photoshop lacks is some more of the more dynamic, more physics-based systems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just up to you on what your like use case is for something and which piece of software you use. Some people, they'll be content to just use Clip Studio forever. Not Clip Studio. Sorry, Procreate. Clip Studio actually has copious amounts of features in it. Procreate is more straightforward.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think I will wrap this one up. Demo number 2.
Could you zoom in a little bit on that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you guys can kind of see the different types of texture that you were actually able to get in there. I think that pretty much everyone in here has probably tried to find some sort of charcoal brush before and been displeased with the results. But there's some like different good qualities in here.
Yeah, and one thing I also need to mention, like one key feature of my brushes that some people are starting to do more now, but for a while, I couldn't find any other brush backs that had this feature, and it is that the brush rotation is controlled by the tilt of my pen. So, and this is really fundamental because when brushes don't have this, they kind of just feel like a flat shape you're dragging around.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like the classic round brush. It's just a shape. But when you have something more like this flat brush, the tilt of my hand changes the width of the stroke and the angle of the stroke, you know. And I don't know if it's clear on the screen. It's kind of something you kind of need to see my hand for, but I'm not adjusting the brush size here.
Yeah, you can kind of just
changing
see
the angle of my pen. And so I can get anything in between. So a thin line, a moderate line, and a thick line. So I think it's so beautiful to have this feature because you don't have to constantly change the size of your brush. You can fit the stroke exactly where you want it in a painting too. You know, if you're trying to place like a beautiful little detail in your painting, you need just the right shape. Well, it's so much easier when you can control the angle of the brush.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some people might be familiar with that Wacom has what they call an art pen that has rotation control. The standard pen, which I'm using, doesn't have rotation control, but it does have pin tilt control. And so this feature is bound to the pin tilt. And having used both the art pen and this standard brush, I've actually found that I prefer the pin tilt to rotation, which is kind of surprising. But so that's great though, because everyone who has a standard Wacom pen can use this.
Yeah, absolutely. What's the next demo, Lane?
All right, so the next one, I'm jumping to ink, my ink brushes. So let me jump down here.
It's a good one for all you comics people out there, the manga people.
Yeah, so my focus here is the concept of density of detail to drive focus to the subject. And now the thing is actually I've already sort of set myself up here in a good place, because composition begins with the arrangement of your subject. And I put a lot of thought into the arrangement here of this skull. I cast a shadow behind it so that shadow kind of overlaps a big alligator skull behind it. And so it frames the smaller skull very nicely. But we have a really big, if I just trace this, we have a big graphic shape here, very simple shape. And then towards my focal point, we have smaller shapes. And this is a higher density of information and detail. And so naturally, that's going to create a really strong focal point. So sometimes your reference may not be as thoughtfully composed as this. So you have to be more intentional while you're drawing to capture that quality. But since I've done that ahead of time, I can kind of follow my subject for the most part. And so I'm just going to block in. Right now I'm using my concept marker brush, and this is kind of just a good inky brush. You can get sort of a little bit of a translucent wash, kind of like it's a watered down ink. If you use low pressure, you can get kind of a dry brush effect. But then if I press hard, I can get a nice opaque stroke as well. So I get a full range. Again, that's what I like in brushes, is when you can get a full range of effects simply by how you hold your hand.
Yeah, I like the way that it's actually kind of blending into itself.
Yeah. So I'm just going to block things in like really roughly.
So there was someone in the chat here who said, soon they should have their summer sale. We have it going now. Yeah, that's part of why we're here. Because I mean, if we tell you about Lane's brushes all the time, which we do, but if we told you about them and then you wanted to go get them and you're like, I'm $2 short. Not today you aren't. Not today you aren't. No, for this whole month up until the beginning of next month, in July, everything on Proko is 20% off. So that's going to be brushes, reference packs like the ones being used right now, and like actual courses if you're looking to learn something like that. Anything that you're looking for is on sale right now. So go get it. Do it. And then another person in the chat did ask, can I watch this after the live is over? Yes.
Yeah, so I'm blocking in the shapes. The fun thing about ink, you're usually trying to focus on the big shapes of shadow and the big shapes of light. So I'm squinting my eyes and trying to ignore all the range of value in between. And so if it's in shadow, I'm going to paint it black. If it's in light, I'm going to avoid it. Simple as that.
A person earlier did ask, let's see exactly what the thing they said. Ed Swales was asking, do you have any tips for simulating the use of a limited palette when working digitally?
It's difficult because with digital, obviously, we are not limited by the pigment we squeeze out of a tube. That's I should say it's one of the perks, the benefits of traditional painting, is that it does give you those natural limits. which can lead to much more sophisticated color palettes. Whereas with digital tools, we have to be much more conscious and intentional in that regard because we have the full spectrum right underneath our hand. And then it's so easy just to grab something without really thinking very much. And I would say I've always had the tendency to do that. I would just like, I need a red, I'll grab the most vibrant red possible. But with traditional tools, you're limited. The pigment can only get so bright. And you can squeeze out just a few colors at a time, and that forces you to have a nice, very sophisticated, limited palette. I don't know if there's any good trick, really, other than just being intentional and mindful with the digital tools. Sometimes I will I will kind of lay out the colors I want to use on my page and say, okay, this is going to be my palette, and then try to draw from that. But I don't know if there's any other tricks.
Yeah, and I agree. I think the idea of actually putting it right there on the page with you is probably a pretty good one. So you don't give yourself the space to actually go and select something different from the color picker. I think that's a fantastic one. I didn't think of this one. I was going to say what you initially said, were just like limit yourself. But that's a good tip.
Yeah. And again, I think like the natural limitations are actually the strength of traditional tools, because typically more sophisticated art has a lot of limitations, like, whether it be the color they use or the values they use or the size of the brush strokes they're using. There's some limitations that prevents the artist from just making chaos and using everything possible.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with digital, you just have to be way more conscious of that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's a big one for digital in general about many things, is you kind of put yourself on rails so you don't fall to your worst impulses.
Mm-hmm.
L asked, when studying values, do you make the reference image black and white or study from it in full color? For this one, you're doing this in full color, but do you ever change this?
Yes, I think it's great if you want to just immediately reduce the variables of your subject. Turn it to grayscale, and I actually have a hotkey to do that. Sometimes I'll paint like this, just leave it in grayscale. Because you really can think of color as an added level of information on top of value. And a lot of times, color can distract you from the value, and value is definitely most important to making something read clearly. So I think after a while, I've just kind of trained myself to see past the color.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't always do that, but I think it's definitely a useful trick.
Yeah, agreed. I think it definitely is one that over time, like so many other things in art, you have to set this intentional practice in the beginning, but later on, without even realizing it, you'll stop reaching for that intentional way of doing it that limits you, and it's just more of an innate skill that you've built up over time. It's like even with just like a simple tool thing, like the first time you start to use a brush pen for something, you have to kind of limit yourself and find the characteristics of what you expect from it and how you can best use those. But later on, you'll just pick it up and you just go, and then it's harder to even try to pull back and explain how you're using it to someone else who doesn't know, because you're just doing it so innately. Lola in the back said that they were going to share this VOD after it's over with all of their friends. They were going to spam them with it. Yes. More of this behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the nice thing about the way that Lane has chosen to demo these things and show this stuff off, it's something where you still get to see the specific tools being used, but the concepts at work here are something that you can use just in general practice, even if you're not using Lane's awesome brushes and brush packs that are on sale for 20% off right now during the Proko summer sale.
Yeah, it's the concepts that really interest me. with this sort of thing. Um, and I've learned that if I'm struggling with a painting to make it interesting, um, oftentimes the solution is to say, okay, what's some sort of abstract principle that I can focus on to bring this piece together? And so density of details is an example of that. I can drive focus by having a greater density of shapes happening around my focal point. Whereas naturally, if you have less detail elsewhere, your eye won't be drawn to that area.
Mm-hmm.
And now one particular challenge with this reference is that the teeth of the crocodile skull next to the skull, this is pretty intricate area. And if I'm not careful, I risk putting maybe a little too much emphasis on the teeth that will kind of distract from the skull. So kind of a tricky situation, and you will almost always encounter some sort of tricky challenge with your subjects like this.
I was curious, is that the reason why you chose to have the little kind of dot of the paper value kind of poking through?
Yeah, you mean right here? Or...
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so anything I can do to kind of reduce the contrast as I address these details. And I think what I'm going to do next, I'm going to add sort of a tonal wash that's going to help to reduce the contrast further. But yeah, just something I'm being thoughtful about as I lay this in.
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy for some detail to begin to pull attention away from the intended focus. And you still want to have it there. You still want the details because it's fun. It adds interest. But composition is all about directing the viewer first and foremost to your primary focal point, and then in sequence to the other interesting details.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the benefits of doing something that is like a limited value study, like a no-tan study, thumbnail studies of something. I think it helps kind of set your expectation for how that composition will work before you go and spend the time on something. Or it helps you to kind of break down the pieces of the artist that you like the most to learn how they do it and how you can apply that to your own work. Let's see. I think this is a question possibly for you in here. So they said, do you favor any traditional mediums over others? And do you have any favorite study practices for those mediums?
I'd say like traditional charcoal drawing, charcoal pencils is probably my favorite traditional medium right now. I just love the feel of it, honestly, and the simplicity. I think that's a big aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
When I first started drawing with charcoal, I had a really difficult time because I was trying to force it to do so much more than it wanted to do. And I realized that the beauty of charcoal is its limitation, its simplicity. And when I began to think of it about that way, suddenly I was like, oh, I'm just going to focus on separating light shapes from shadow shapes and then having nice transitions between them. And suddenly, wow, charcoal is amazing. I can control it.
Yeah, no, I think charcoal is a good one for this, though. Like you said, the limitation is kind of the nice thing of it. And I think that's one of the things that people struggle with when they first start using it, because they're like, like this, like, especially if they use Vine or something, and they breathe too hard next to it, and it's all gone. Like, it's a nice thing for you to learn hand control and some value control. Jack Fell Down One says, I've been searching Amazon for simple forms to arrange them myself and draw or paint them, but I can't find any. Do you have anything that you prefer in this that isn't skulls?
Can you just repeat the first part of that?
Yeah,
again?
they said they've been searching Amazon for simple forms to arrange them themselves and draw or paint them, but they can't find any.
Yeah, so I found simple wooden forms that I used. I think I actually did get some on Amazon. They're like little play blocks, actually. Wooden. there's like sets full of wooden blocks
Hmm.
of all sorts, and some are made for kids, some are made for like teachers when they're like teaching primitive forms. You can also get like some foam primitive forms. I don't know if any of these photos have like this. This gray ball is a foam ball,
Hmm.
and then actually a lot of these, like the white egg. I think I found a wooden egg and I just painted it white. So yeah, like a lot of like this cube shape here actually sanded down the edges to get those fun shapes,
Hmm.
uh, and painted those. So some of it's kind of my own stuff, but yeah, you can find some fundamental forms online.
Yeah, I think kids blocks is definitely a good one. The first thing that I went to, because like I'm a broken nerd, I thought of were those giant foam dice sets that people have
Mm-hmm.
that you can get, and so there's a bunch in there, all these different hedrons of different polyhedrons, you know.
Yeah. Another thing I played around with, I don't think any of these images show them, but I actually just got some clay and sculpted some primitive forms too. So
Mm,
that's always an option.
yeah, absolutely. I hope that helps you, Jack. Corral Summer asked, "What limitations do you think charcoal has? When I use it, I didn't feel particularly limited by it, so I'm a little curious what you wanted it to do that."
Well, limitation, obviously, it doesn't do color, but I mean, there's like, uh, it's more of like within the time you're given limitations. Because obviously, if you have a ton of time, you can get tons of intricate detail with charcoal. But when I'm drawing a figure from life and the model's only posing for like 5 minutes, you really have to focus and say, okay, I'm going to focus on the shapes of light and the shapes of shadow and get that down. If I try to do any more than that, I'm going to lose control. And so
Mhm.
that's what I mean by limitation.
Yeah, I think especially if you're looking at the different types of charcoal, each of them will have kind of a different purpose, and you can use them in more specific ways. Like just like a powdered charcoal is going to act differently than stick charcoal versus pencil charcoal or vine, Each of those will be different, and some of those will be a little more malleable or less malleable than others. And it just takes time to practice. But if you put time into a piece, like you said, you can go to town. I mean, there's a reason that it was used in the
Hmm.
past to make such beautiful works.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe a limitation is the wrong word to use, but just
It's
kind of
got
how I think about it.
it's got different strengths.
Hmm.
JWK Creates asked, any chance of ape skulls in that pack?
Yes, actually.
Ooh,
Um, yeah, I don't have any examples up on my screen, but I do have a replica gorilla skull in the pack.
nailed it. What's this pack that you're talking about? Where can people find it?
Yeah, the skulls and bones pack. It's
You
now
can
in Proko.
20% off during the Proko Summer sale. Yeah, you guys should go check it out. I'll drop a link in the chat for you guys.
All right, so I've kind of laid this in now, and I think I'm gonna jump to one of my diluted ink brushes called Orpheus. Got to give them cool names. And so now that I have just kind of some high contrast tones, black and white, I'm going to introduce some more gradation between them. And specifically, like I was saying, on areas that I don't want to compete with my focal point, I'll kind of introduce this tone to reduce the contrast. And also just add a bit of texture to the mix. So I'll zoom in so you guys can see it. I know on the stream it probably gets compressed a bit, so it's hard to tell what's actually happening. But
I appreciate that.
bit of paper-like texture appearing in there now. And now I can also use this for the more subtle features of the skull. There's a lot of very nuanced textures and little forms in the skull that you can't really describe well with just a a pitch black stroke is too strong. So to get these more subtle gradients, I can now do this with more of a diluted ink that I have here.
Can you zoom in on that one, just so people can really see the detail on this one? Yeah, see, so there is texture in there. From afar, it might look like it was going to be just like a soft round or something, but look at all that in there. It's juicy. It's delicious.
Yeah. Speaking of texture, like I have others here that have like... I named this brush Clarble, which is a made-up name. But I felt like, oh, what does this texture look like? It looks like Clarble to me. So that's what I named the brush.
It kind of looks like a fingerprint, kind of.
Yeah, it is kind of fingerprintish.
Yeah, I like it. I think Clarable's a good name. It's real. Do you know the Kiki Booba thing?
No.
There's this study, and they present people with two shapes. One is kind of this like rounded blob, and then one is a spiky shape. And they ask them which one is which name, Kiki and Booba. And universally, people said the spiky one was Kiki.
Yeah, isn't that interesting how the sound of a word can have such a connotation?
Absolutely.
But yeah, I had hundreds of brushes here, so I had to come up with lots of creative names because I didn't just want to have ink brush 1, 2, 3, 4.
I think like ink brush one underscore final,
yeah.
final. No, I like the idea of washing it afterwards, because then this gives it actual like rounding and the other implications that you want for the form, while still being a pretty limited study.
Yeah. I think I might also introduce a bit of lighter value as well.
Okay. I like this. This is further reinforcing the idea of like compositionally drawing the eye to where the most information is.
Mm-hmm.
I do appreciate that you didn't really try to communicate any of the information in the back of the longer skull.
Yeah, it's just a bit too subtle for this.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I enjoy about the ink approach, and I know this is digital ink, it's not real ink, but it still forces my brain to think and approach the subject in a unique way. I find that when I'm using the ink brushes, it helps me to actually diverge a bit from my reference, and usually in more of a graphic, more sort of a punchy, stylish way. So I'm trying to get some fun sort of graphic shapes happening, even within this lighter tone that I'm adding. I'm not following that reference exactly.
Yeah.
I'm trying to put some design into it.
This is definitely something that I've appreciated in your work in general. The times when you've chosen to add those more graphical shapes in something that otherwise feels so traditional.
I can show a few examples too. These are some of the inky illustrations that I've done with these brushes, and like this one, for instance. I just tend to get a little bit more playful. I tend to get a bit more imaginative when I'm using these brushes, and it's kind of fun. I think how the tool can really influence my approach.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
Now, for these, were you combining references at all? Like, did you have the female figure and the bird?
These are more creative studies, creative illustrations. So, like, I know I grabbed some reference for the bird, but I didn't like directly follow it or anything. So it's pretty much invented stuff.
Okay.
Nice. And like this one, this is an ink figure using more of the diluted strokes. This one's more observational, direct from reference, but really playing up sort of almost the really watered down look. Get some nice soft gradients happening.
Is this the way that you've drawn this here, is this like what you have over in your Patreon with your figure study lessons?
Yes, I'm doing all sorts of figure drawings right now with my Patreon. Right now, the series I'm working on is actually just a simple combination of figures and fabric like this here. So I'm using drapery in all sorts of playful ways because I see drapery as just like a really fun, malleable way to create shapes that may accentuate a gesture in a figure or frame the figure or cast a bit of dramatic shadow onto the figure, you know? So this is a good example here of that. Really fun stuff.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. So that's the focus of my Patreon right now. Let me say, I guess I can kind of wrap up just by showing a few more, just the range of things that I do with this brush pack and whatnot. Here are more figure
great.
drawings. I like the colored pencil look. It's really fun. This one's more like this is like a Sargent inspired portrait here, you know, and using my brush called like the Sargent charcoal. And like look at this. I must say that looks pretty convincing as a traditional stroke.
I would agree. Yeah, I think it's okay to like the things that you have made.
So again, like it's really my creation of these brushes was informed by my experience with the real tools. So I think that's the advantage I've had making these. But yeah, the painterly stuff, you got more illustration stuff, you know, playing with color and light.
Mm-hmm.
Again, sort of a Sargent inspired portrait here. And just getting into the texture.
Look at that. Do you think that, so for your Patreon, just to continue talking about that one, do you think that that's something where you would end up going into an image at some point in time that's more painterly?
Yeah, I think I will. Right now, I'm focusing more on drawing, but I do think I will start to introduce more painterly stuff as well down the line, because I do enjoy it. I actually enjoy it, you know, switching back and forth. Keeps it interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think people should go in there and get in the ground floor early. Learning figure drawing is a pretty standard concept to then springboard into you learning other stuff. So if you get there now, you'll be prepped for when he starts doing colors.
Yeah. I like to study cats too. They're great subjects. And so the fur gives you a lot of room to play around with some juicy, goopy strokes, you know, using the mixer brush, which I should point out again, actually. The mixer brush, like I said, is one of the unique features of Photoshop that, as far as I know, I could be wrong, but as far as I know, no other app really has anything quite like it. So let me go to my mixer brushes. And yeah, I have hotkeys also for all these things. And the fun thing about this Photoshop brush window as well is that the brush window automatically jumps to whatever brush I have selected. So I don't always have to go and grab a brush. I can just use my hotkeys to jump back and forth. So that's quite nice. Mm-hmm. So I have my mixture brush here. And basically the way mixture brushes work is that they allow you to sample any color on your canvas. You know, the stamp that you see on the screen is where it's going to sample from. You sample that, and it picks up those colors, and you can drag them around. And so you get these really beautiful, traditional, like, strokes. And I love to use this. This is one of the reasons I stick with Photoshop. So yeah. I used it quite a lot in this one, as you can see.
Mm-hmm. There was one thing here that came up again. So John Doe in the chat asked, I see some of these labeled as Photoshop and some labeled specifically as Procreate. Are the Photoshop packs not tested on Procreate?
They are separate because, like I said, you can import them into Procreate, but I generally wouldn't recommend it because Procreate does not have the file organization that Photoshop has for hundreds of brushes. So that's why I have these separate packs for Procreate, the charcoal and pastel. I am planning to make a painting pack for Procreate in the future, and probably ink as well. I've had some people ask for those, but right now those are specifically for Photoshop.
Yeah, we've definitely gone just so that we can confidently give people the answer that they can load them in and still get some really good results with those other brushes. We've tried them on our end. We feel comfortable with saying that a lot of the characteristics that you expect to get with Photoshop, you will still get in Procreate and other software of your choosing. There will be some differences for each of those, specifically the folder structure and some other stuff that's in there that will make them different. But it's not like if you go to load these into the other software, you're like, this is all trash now. This sucks. Like, no, they still have underlying good structures within those. But if you're looking at buying some Procreate stuff and you use just Procreate, try just the Procreate ones first if they fit what you're looking for. Let's see. Did you want to show any other examples of the work that you've made with these? Or would you want to take another question?
Another question would be great.
Okay. So I have one here. This is actually nice because we've shown off your figure drawing now. So Aniket was asking, how much time do you spend on the gesture of the figure?
Usually not very long. Usually that's like the first impression I try to capture is the gesture with the first big sweeping stroke. So a matter of seconds really. However, I will say that gesture is something I'm constantly trying to push throughout the whole drawing as well. Yeah, from beginning to end, I'm thinking about gesture.
This makes sense to me. Yeah, because even compositionally, this would factor into it heavily. Let's see. I do have one other question here for you if you want it.
Okay.
All right. So John Doe said, wait a minute. You're telling me that I can buy the Skull and Bones reference pack for 20% off as part of the Proko summer sale right now? Yeah. Yeah, John. Yeah, you can. Yeah, right now everything is 20% off. It's kind of the thing that brought us here today, besides getting the educational principles that Lane was sharing in there. If you guys want to buy something, please feel free. Otherwise, just rewatch this free video that will be up forever. It's okay. You can learn for free. I think that there are a bunch of different tools that you guys will find that are free on Proko. There's some free stuff that you guys can see. There are just some lessons over at proko.com/free. That just gives you a sample pack of lessons, reference photos, and things like that. If you guys just can't find your way to being able to buy anything right now, that's totally okay. That's what YouTube is here for. Please just go out and learn something, Do some of the studies that you've seen Lane talk about here today with those express purposes.
Yeah. So just zooming in on these like pastel drawings here, so you can see the texture. That's the fun to me with the pastel brushes is the powdery texture and the way you can get that optical blending by layering strokes on top of strokes so that the colors filter through each other. All right. Well, is there anything else? Otherwise, I think I'm ready to wrap up. The demos are complete. So I hope you guys enjoyed those. If you want more instruction from me, definitely check out my Patreon again. I'm going to be doing lots of videos. Like I said, right now, focus primarily on figure drawing, but in the future, I will probably expand that a bit as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Go over to that Patreon over there. It's how much a month?
It's just $8.
Look at that! What a savings! Yeah. No,
there's a few tiers, but the instructional tier is $8.
Yeah, there's some good stuff over there. I think right now, if you go over there, you can also help Lane kind of decide what his Patreon looks like. It's still pretty new. There's a bunch of stuff in there, but you can help shape what this is and what you want from it. So get in the ground floor. So yeah, just as a reminder, go check out the brushes. if you want the reference packs. There's good stuff in there. I don't know. I hope that you guys have a good rest of your day. Thanks for joining us.